The end of the American Civil War brought on a period of indeterminable direction and social strife for the future of the nation, a direction that at its worst influence affected the lives of every American individual and redefined the social fabric of the United States. Spurred on much like a written narrative, the political and societal drama of the post-Civil War era pitted many opposing odds against each other. It is within this drama that we find our story, a story of American perseverance in the face of conflict. Those conscious effort and mitigated compromise, the direction of the American ideal was forged in this cauldron of chaos, to the dismay of some, but to the betterment of others. This is the telling of conflict and compromise, the American story of perseverance in the Florida heartland.
Our story begins on the battlefield of a cold February morning in the fields of Baker County, Florida. The year is 1864, and with the recent loss of the Mississippi River to Northern forces, the Confederacy has been struggling to commandeer the direction of the war between the states. Eager to bring an end to the prolonged conflict, the North has ordered a military expedition to be dispatched into Florida, chiefly aiming to disrupt the much-needed supply lines of food and goods to Confederate forces, and to demolish morale for the Confederate war effort. Landing in Jacksonville, Union General Truman Seymour, leader of the Florida expedition, met little resistance. However, venturing further into the heartland of Florida, Seymour was intercepted by Confederate forces near Ocean Pond, a lake near the town of Olustee in Baker County.
The ensuing battle of Olustee was nothing entirely grand and would have been considered a mere skirmish should the battle have taken place in the northern theaters of the war. However, this battle of roughly 5,000 men on both sides represents the largest Civil War battle in Florida history. The resistance of the Confederate forces to the Northern expedition resulted in the Union's defeat at the Battle of Olustee. Although this defeat was in strictly military terms, it highlights the general attitude of the Florida populace towards North, a resistance that would become manifest in the cultural conflicts Florida would undergo during the ensuing Reconstruction era. Though Confederate forces managed to repel the Union from Florida, by May of the following year, the Confederacy would no longer be in existence, having completely exhausted itself from the 4-year-long war. The American Civil War had finally ended, and peace finally secured. Though the military conflict was over, ramifications were not. The Civil War would continue on in the cultural conflicts of the Reconstruction, where Florida would play no small part this time.
Having secured victory, Congress on March 3, 1865 created the Bureau of Refugees Freedmen and abandoned lands to oversee the administration of confiscated Confederate lands and provide emergency relief to freedmen in the South. The Freedmen's Bureau, as it would later be known, would become a notoriously hated institution in the eyes of many Southerners, especially within the southern heartland of Florida. Although it was despised as an institution, the Florida Bureau enjoyed the paradoxical situation of having its commissioners and agents generally liked by the Floridians. This was due in part to the fact that the institution assisted many white planters in the economic aftermath of the war.
Attempting to build a case against the Freedmen's Bureau, President Johnson and his new administration dispatched Generals Steedman and Fullerton to examine the procedures and conduct of the Bureau in the states wherein it was established. Their reports would later become known as the Steedman-Fullerton investigation. Although the investigation managed to find issues elsewhere, their report on Florida was generally favorable. Much of the social strife surrounding the Freedmen's Bureau was levied against its insistence to try and force native whites to honor any equitable contracts they had made with freedmen. Although the reverse was true as well, in that they insisted freedmen honor the contracts they had established. Many local judges were instructed to cooperate with the Freedmen's Bureau and to enforce the policy of racial equity and the upholding of contracts and agreements. One such judge was Robert W. Bullock, a Marion County planter and former Confederate who later became an active conservative Democrat, and conducted his bureau duties with racial equity. Most contracts were generally made between a planter and a number of freedmen. A bureau agent in Jackson County reported 116 contracts involving 600 laborers, and a single Marion County contract included over 70 laborers. White planters were not happy with being forced to abide by what they considered to be erroneous contracts. According to them, no damned Yankee government should interfere with the affairs of well-meaning Southern gentlemen and businessmen. Refusing these contracts, these upstart whites took to the civil courts to sue freedmen on the grounds of broken contracts. Many freedmen were given harsh sentences in the wake of these allegations.
The failure of state courts to deliver equitable justice necessitated the creation of new courts to alleviate the injustice surmounted against freedmen. In late 1866, the organization of the Bureau Courts began as an intercessory force in cases where freedmen could not get fair treatment. The creation of these courts was disapproved by the administration of President Johnson, and due to this, only a few ever convened. With the absence of legal authority to ensure the equality of freedmen, the Assistant Bureau Commissioner instructed Bureau agents to insert provision for arbitration of all disputes in the making of contracts. Any disputes between contracting parties would be decided by a three-man board composed of one member from each side and the Bureau agent. The Bureau agent's decision would be final. By including such arbitration in the contracts, the Freedmen's Bureau clearly devised the means to exercise interpersonal jurisdiction in the disputes between Southern Floridians and freedmen, of which there were many. Such clever maneuvering enabled the Bureau to exercise its purpose to mission with more clarity, but not without the outcry of the Southern population. Public opinion of the Bureau was usually negative, and the Bureau's purpose was painted as being antagonistic to the well-being of Florida and the Southern people as a whole.
The crop failure of 1867 further compounded the general feeling of uneasiness in this region of Central Florida and made matters worse for planters, freedmen, and Bureau agents alike. Rations were devised as an emergency means by the Bureau agent Colonel Sprague to avoid wholesale starvation in areas where crops were failing. The ration was a peck of corn and 3 pounds of bacon weekly for each adult and half the amount for each child. In the belt of plantation counties from Jackson to Alachua and Marion in the center of the peninsula, freedmen were instructed to rent plots of 10 acres or more, agreeing to usually pay the rent in shares of the crop, but given the jurisdiction to farm the land according to their own judgment and foresight. The economic hardships brought on by the crop failure devastated both freedmen and whites alike. A Marion County planter and merchant, Adam L. Eichelberger, fell into financial hardships during the time period.
A lack of fluid capital for investment, agricultural unpredictability, and poor business decision-making compounded to plummet Eichelberger's agricultural enterprise. The decimation of agriculture in Marion County and Central Florida brought suffering to many of the black laborers who depended on wages which did not always materialize in such uncertainty. To assist the hardship farmers faced during the crop failure, the Bureau helped devise the implementation of the sharecropping and cropline systems throughout inner Florida. These new systems bore heavily on everyone involved, especially the tenants, but this was not due to the incompetence of the Bureau, but rather to Florida soil itself. In 1868, Colonel Sprague observed that the products of Florida soil were unable to support a plantation system based on wage labor. According to Sprague, plantations were at an end, with subsistence farming being the only available form of agriculture sustainable in Florida. Though the Bureau was resented for its role as arbiter between whites and freedmen by the inhabitants of Central Florida, it nonetheless played an influential part in the reconstruction of Florida during this difficult period of agricultural uncertainty. The end of the plantation era in Florida heralded unprecedented economic havoc. This duly coincided with great changes in the cultural workings of Florida's social life. Hopes of a return to the antebellum prosperity of the plantation ideal were ended with punctual hardship. The lifestyle of the rich and well-mannered Southern gentleman was no longer feasible. The consequences of secession and resistance were setting in. Despite the grave reality of such a situation, Florida's aspiration to the Southern ideal was met with increasing enthusiasm. Their romanticization of the Confederate cause was most evident in 1866 with the release of The Fall of the Confederacy, which quickly became a bestseller in Florida. The Fall of the Confederacy was accompanied by The Land We Love, a monthly magazine published by former General D.H. Hill. The popularity of these bestsellers show a continuing domination of pro-Southern sentiment among the Floridian population.
Precipitated by the social climate, the religious situation of Florida's many churches underwent considerable change in the years following the close of the Civil War. Many freedmen abandoned the previous churches they attended in the antebellum era and preferred instead to attend all black congregations. Following this trend, most churches became completely segregated by 1875. Freedmen preferred the withdrawal as they previously experienced a master-servant mentality in white-dominated churches. Whites, on the other hand, resented the withdrawal as the mainstream churches suffered greatly and their memberships from the flee of freedmen. As the flight of blacks out of white churches continued, black ministers became increasingly crucial and important in the formation of black communities. Such influence was greatly envied by white ministers who sought to wield such influence within their own communities but only held such sway in limited effect. Churches began to become the central political, social, cultural, and recreational institution for free blacks. Hardest hit of all in terms of membership was the Methodist Episcopal Church of the South. 40% of its 19,000 members in 1862 were black. By 1867, it had only 6,266 members. nearly all of whom were white. Many Methodist communities had to elevate laymen to the offices of ordained ministers due to the rapid decrease of membership across Florida. To resist and combat the spread of these black congregations, many whites began taking measures to disrupt the advance of these institutions. In Ocala, a black Sunday school of 150 members was discontinued when Methodist minister M.A. Clouts, a Republican politician soon to become Marion County Sheriff, denied use of his church building to freedmen when they formed a separate congregation. The Methodists were not the only denomination to face difficulty with the movement of blacks out of the churches. Baptists experienced similar hardship when black congregations began meeting separately soon after the war. Gradually, black Baptists established their own facilities as well as separate organizations. As with the Methodists, the whites wanted segregation within the church while the blacks desired complete separation. And here to also, the church became the paramount institution in the lives of Baptist freedmen. Baptists of Ocala considered ousting local judge Jesse Goss, when the judge became an outspoken, radical, and vigorous defender of freedmen in the area, only relenting to defellowship him with the council of other moderate members.
The story of Reconstruction in Florida would continue on a long and arduous path, a path riddled with the pitfalls of conflict. The values of American society would drastically take shape during this crucial crux of American history. The cultural framework of Floridian society would no longer be the same, having forever changed under the pressure of events spurred by the end of the American Civil War. With the conclusion of Reconstruction in 1877 with the Great Compromise, Reconstruction would come to an end. The withdrawal of federal troops was underway, and the presence of the Freedmen's Bureau was long gone. And so, from this point, the rest of Florida history was underway. The conflict of the past was gone, the compromise of the present accomplished, and the future now determined.